Vice President Kamala Harris won the backing of top Democrats Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries today, bringing some extra momentum to her first official campaign rally in battleground Wisconsin.
I am told as of this morning that we have earned the support of enough delegates to secure the Democratic nomination. And I pledge to you I will spend the coming weeks continuing to unite our party so that we are ready to win in November.
While Democrats are expressing enthusiasm for their presumptive nominee, Canadians are signaling anxiety about the Republican nominee. New polling from the Angus Reid Institute suggests that 66% of Canadians think Trump would be bad or terrible for Canada, with most saying the economy and the Canada-U.S. relationship would worsen. Lots to talk about with the Tuesday Power Panel. Michelle Cadario is a former Liberal National Campaign Director. Françoise Boivin is a former NDP MP. And here with me in the studio, Kate Harrison, a Conservative political analyst. It's good to see you all. I'm going to keep my laptop open because who knows what's going to happen in the next 5 minutes. Michelle, have you ever seen a political cycle quite like this? And what do you make of this sudden change in everything south of the border?
Well, it's crazy, you know, and you're right. Whiplash is there. The moaning and groaning and worry of Democrats about just the concern is, President Biden would he be able to do another 4 years after performance in that debate? And then, gets COVID, and then next minute you have a brand new candidate, 25 years younger, looking like just a generational change on stage, not to mention a woman of color, and someone who is a formidable campaigner. So, the assassination attempt on Mr. Trump, as serious as that was, seems like 100 years ago, as these news cycles move faster and faster. And, focus now is on who's going to be her running mate. And is this going to actually make a real positive change in the polls for the Democrats? It's wild to watch.
Well, Kate, we have seen a bump in the polls, right? But it's kind of honeymoon phase, media cycle. So, we got to give it a couple of weeks to see if it stabilizes. So we don't know if that's real. But the 100 million US, that's real, and that's real money. That suggests there was a pent-up demand for change, and people are throwing cash at it.
Yeah, and you have to hand it to the Democrats in terms of being able to rally so quickly. A lot of folks thought that maybe Kamala Harris would not get the support of the AOCs of the world, of the Bernie Sanders of the world, and some more on the more left wing of the party. It seems that everybody is falling in line very quickly, and they really have no choice. We are so close to the election that a divisive race is not an option for them. So they deserve a lot of credit as a kind of political machine to be able to do that. Certainly, I think there's going to be some bumps for Harris's candidacy. She was responsible for the border. I think that's probably a top 3 issue in the U.S. It's hard for Canadians, I think, to get a sense of how real that is for the American voter, but it is a major issue for them.
Well, look at how big Roxham Road was and multiply that by thousands.
Yeah,
right?
on steroids for the last 10 to 20 years, right? So it's a major issue there, but certainly in terms of a contrast, when you're looking at standing up a campaign for either Trump or Harris, that contrast exists now in a way that I think it maybe didn't with Biden, and that will make for a much more interesting campaign.
Françoise, it's not just the contrast exists, it's the ability to articulate the contrast. Right? Joe Biden really struggled, and I don't say that pejoratively because, I'm not trying to insult the man, but you saw Harris at her rallies prosecuting Trump for his convictions and personal failings, and also talking about a vote-moving issue or a mobilizing issue like abortion with a passion that Biden never brought to the conversation. He always talked about it as a legal precedent that was overturned by the Supreme Court and made it legalistic rather than personal. It changes the whole dynamic of this race.
Completely. I mean, you have a very, very articulate woman who's used to debate, who's used to argue, who's used to prosecute, and she's got the perfect person in hands to do so. And the fact that she had been a bit under the radar for the last 4 years. I was hearing your interview with David Frum, and you were bang on in a sense that she almost looks brand new. at the same time that she's got notoriety. People know who she is. What another candidate from the roster of Democrat could not have necessarily pull off in such a short time before the election. So, and she knows the apparel. So, like Kate was saying, kudos to the Democratic Party to have turned it so fast, so quickly. They knew time was of the essence. They had to do something. And I've never seen a situation in the States go from almost despair in the ranks of the Democratic Party to hope. You could feel it during the rally. I listened to every moment, and I could feel it. It almost gave me a sense of the early days of Obama first mandate. So it's going to be interesting to see how it continues, if she will live up to the hype.
So, Michelle, it's interesting, right? Because, you know, we look at these things and we always think about the Canadian examples. And to go back to the Paul Martin, Jean Chrétien transition, we'll call it. Yes, like, you know, this is a painful thing to force out a presidential candidate, like the Democrats kind of did with Joe Biden. And yet there was that moment live on television where he's on the phone and she's in the room and he says, "I love you, kid," and she says, "I love you too." And I could never see Jean Chrétien and Paul Martin talking to each other like that. But that's what makes this viable, right? Because her hands are clean and he may be going reluctantly, but he's passing it to her willingly, which really matters.
Well, that's right. And the reasons that he's going is simply age, right? It is simply the fact of the worry that can he actually physically do the job 4 years from now, like that. So there's no harm. There's no, you know, Kamala Harris wasn't leading a pack to get him out. No. I say with a little chagrin, and but he, you know, it was Francois said it right. It was despair, in fact, of every Democrat and every person who might be a Democrat. The money had dried up, and it was simply an untenable situation for him to stay. And then he got COVID, and so there's just no way. And so he, you know, passed the torch. I think one thing she's got to be worried about, and I would be worried about if I was running her campaign, is just how much Joe Biden is going to be an influence on the campaign. Just how much stumping is he going to do with her? She has to stand on her own 2 feet. She has to be the leader of this ticket, and she has to be the prominent figure in the window. And she might have to actually veer off course of what Joe Biden has put forward, because she has to make the ground hers. And so I think that's really, really important, and that's going to be tricky to navigate.
No, that's a very interesting point, right? Because he did say yesterday he'd be out there as much as you want, but when you're she's part of his administration, right? So there are those challenges. Kate, I just want to get back to the Angus Reid numbers that show a lot of anxiety in Canada about what a Trump-Vance victory would mean for this place. Though people, despite the attempts by the Liberals to connect Poilievre to Trump, right, more people do trust the Poilievre government to deal with Donald Trump, despite the success the Liberals had the first time around. When you look at this new mix of this new race down there, I mean, what are the implications for Canada potentially, depending on how it goes? Yeah, well, I'd offer, we spend a lot of time thinking about the potential negative outcomes of a U.S. election, and I think that there are risks with either candidate. You know, I think about Gretchen Whitmer's position on Line 5, for instance. She's going to be a key advisor to Kamala Harris. That threatened to disrupt major energy infrastructure in this country, and so I don't think that it's entirely smooth sailing. And we have a lot in common with the U.S. We share a ton of values. We share a ton of economic cooperation, and I think either administration would see that. Obviously, the policy agenda between the Democrats and the Trudeau Liberals is much closer than what the Trump administration would be. His vice presidential candidate is very clear that he is not a fan of NAFTA. So I think the question that Canadians should be asking our government in this state is, you know, what are we doing to prepare for either outcome? And I think that means, you know, standing up more domestic economic opportunity. It's bipartisan support across the border, not just a Liberal-led effort, but trying to tap into Conservatives, as was done with CUSMA, looking again at our tax and regulatory regime to help make sure that we're creating the best possible domestic environment so that regardless of what happens in November, we're prepared to withstand some change, especially if it's towards the Republicans. Yeah, Francoise, I mean, there's always going to be tensions and challenges with the U.S. administration, no matter how well you get along with them. But when you look at the sort of the isolationist, protectionist, and kind of nativist policies on display at the Republicans last week, I mean, Ukraine, NATO, whatever you call NAFTA now, all of those things very much in play on one side of the ledger. Like there's pretty stark outcome differences depending on how this goes.
Oh, definitely. And I agree with Kate that you have to be, the government of Canada has to be ready for one eventuality or the other. And it's never an easy sale either with a Democrat government in the U.S. It's never easy in the U.S. versus anybody because they're so huge. It's them first. Most Americans, and I pass enough time in the States to know that they don't really know who we are and what we do and how close we are to them and so on and so forth. It's just in the tone that it will have a big impact come November, depending on the result. And at the same time, both parties in the States have to be careful because most people, the voters, are neither Democrat or Republican. So they stand a bit, they're not all, oh, yay, Democrat or oh, boo, Republican. So they'll have to be wary of the rhetoric because they will listen very closely, like we do in Canada, to what these parties have to offer. It's not as simple as just saying, hope is back again, or I'm going to get after all my enemies when I get elected. It's more complicated than that.
Okay, I know it's really complicated. Michelle, I only got about 30 seconds. Just your quick thoughts on what the government right now can do beyond the Team Canada approach to get ready for whatever may come.
Well, I actually think that is bang on what they have to do. It has to be nonpartisan, as Kate said. And let's remember, we've all, whatever government's been in Canada, we've gotten along with Republican governments before who were traditionally pro-trade, anti-protectionist. It is very much the Donald Trump party that has put a bit of a snafu in how things, the natural order of things between Canada and the U.S. have been. Some tension, but generally great allies and great economic partners. Yeah. So I think it's a very particular situation, and we've got to go back to the playbook that we actually made work last time. Hopefully make it work again.
And look, who knows what's going to happen next? In 10 days, we've had an attempted assassination, a Republican convention, a COVID infection, a candidate resignation, and a presumptive nomination. It is flying in the United States. So they got time. We're out of time. I want to thank you all, Michelle Cadario, Francoise Boivin, and Kate Harrison. And thank you.